Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
As to the front pages, as usual, lots and lots of different stories today. The Mail on Sunday leading with the Duchess of York, Fergie, trying to get £250 million for the fake Mazhar Mahmood Sheikh sting. That's really exciting to the newspapers, perhaps less so to the rest of us. The Observer has a big Brexit story here. Europe's leaders to force the UK into a hard Brexit. And there is a sense today that the options in front of the government are narrowing, that on the continent they're saying must be a hard Brexit. Lots of Tory MPs are saying there should be a hard Brexit as well. The Sunday Times, the Queen will invite President Trump to Windsor, which is apparently going to help us a lot. And a very moving story here by their writer A.A. Gill, who's getting married and has cancer. We're going to be talking about that. Also a very interesting story here. Apparently Tony Blair, remember him, he's coming back. He thinks the Prime Minister is a lightweight and Jeremy Corbyn is a nutter. So I'm back, says Tony Blair. We'll see how that goes. And then finally, the Sunday Telegraph, a tax raid on middle-class salary perks. That's things like private health insurance and cars and so forth. It predicts for the autumn statement. I don't know if Philip Hammond will tell us about that. And, of course, the extraordinary picture of Ed Balls doing his thing in Blackpool, which we all watched yesterday. Rather against my instinct, he is the overnight success and shows a way back into politics that we hadn't seen before. John Longworth, however, let's start with proper politics. And you've chosen something, I think, from The Sun and a piece also by Dan Hodges in the Mail on Sunday.
Yes, I chose as my opener Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, writing in The Sun about his vision for the autumn statement, and Dan Hodges writing about Philip Hammond and how that stacks up. I think the Chancellor is on the right track to begin with. He's talking about stimulating the economy, about providing infrastructure development and so on. Hodges is saying, actually, this is the death of Osborne-omics, that George Osborne's... well, that's what Hodges is saying. And he's saying that this is Keynesian economics. Of course, Keynes himself said, when the facts change, I change my mind, and was very flexible in terms of his economic approach. And I think that's exactly what the government need to do, and what Philip Hammond needs to do in the autumn statement. The overriding thing of these two articles for me is one of the fringe benefits of Brexit is it gives the UK the opportunity to create the best economy in the world. And this is what the Chancellor needs to set out to do, not necessarily all in one go, but in stages. We need to be creating the sort of economic backcloth where enterprise can flourish and the UK ends up being the best economy in the world.
But if he's facing, we'll see, a £100 billion black hole at the moment, is this kind of level of investment really going to make is it a row of beans?
Well, there needs to be some significant investment in infrastructure, and including, for example, wireless and connectivity and fibre in the UK, which is lamentable. But also we need to be talking about investing in skills and training. We need to be investing in science and R&D. We need to be creating increased productivity and all those things that will make the UK a great economy. But as I'll come on to later on the Brexit thing, of course, there's a huge opportunity to crystallise the benefits of Brexit and to do that early. And that will be a massive boost for the economy.
Carolyn, view from the CBI, as it were. You've chosen a piece from the Sunday Telegraph there.
Yes, a couple of pieces here really following on this theme of what we might expect from this autumn statement. So the Sunday Telegraph and also the Sunday Times, just really about how this autumn statement is focusing on the domestic economy and productivity in particular. Roads, skills investment, the areas that John mentioned, is quite a lot of nuts and bolts. Yes, within a more difficult fiscal environment, but the building blocks being put in place to focus on a stronger economy for enterprise, which feels, again, as I agree with John, absolutely the right thing to do.
And what does the CBI feel about the direction of Brexit, the dangers of a cliff edge versus a kind of smooth transition? What are you saying about that?
Well, picking up on a piece today, the challenges of a cliff edge Brexit, the 1 minute past midnight challenge, is around actually a lot of quite practical things. It's around customs officials. It's around big box warehouses. And I think one of the things that it needs to be really understood is what that would feel like for business and the challenges if that cliff edge were to happen.
And of course, whether it happens or not, we're seeing politicians with their reputations bouncing back again, not least Mr. Nigel Farage. You've got a story about him and Trump.
Yes.
He's trying to milk that moment.
He is, yes. You know,
with Trump.
the photo that we now know of him going over, being the first from Britain to meet up with Donald Trump. And the Sunday Express have got the sort of inside track on what they talked about. And you might have thought it would be the economy or Brexit or whatever, but no. Donald Trump has declared war on Scottish wind farms. And,
it's his golf course up in the northeast.
Well, yes, what he said is he's urged Mr Farage to launch a campaign opposing new wind farm developments, saying that they're blighting the beautiful Scottish landscape. But what he actually means probably is that they're blighting the view from my very expensive golf course.
And Simon Walters of the Mail on Sunday has interviewed him, and he says, Farage, that is, not Trump. And Farage says that he wants to try and come back to the House of Commons if there's a Thanet by-election because the Tories fiddled
do you think he means that, or do you think he's just being naughty?
Well, he's both. He's a very naughty guy.
And also, just linking in, Peter Hitchens in the Mail on Sunday has a theory that he's decided that this actually now is not Donald Trump's sense of body double like Saddam Hussein used to, and he thinks it's not his face, it's not his smile.
Like
open neck shirt isn't quite right. He thinks he just sent his hair.
So this is a faked photograph. Very good. Now let's keep going on the economy.
Yep.
And the Tories. You've got the story in the Sunday Telegraph, John. This is a big bunch of Tory MPs, lots of former cabinet ministers, calling for what's now being called a hard Brexit, or you'd say a clean Brexit.
Clean Brexit, exactly. I mean, it's a very important story. I think this is Steve Baker MP's probably been involved in organising this group. They're calling quite rightly for a clean Brexit. As you can imagine, you know, as co-chair of Leave Means Leave, I very much support this. I'm very much in the view that actually, as you said at the beginning, the UK now has narrowing options in this respect. The Continentals actually want us to leave cleanly. It would actually be in our interests to actually do that and do it as soon as possible. We ought to trigger Article 50 early in order to crystallise the benefits of Brexit as soon as possible. And those benefits, of course, include, for example, free trade. If we actually reduce tariff barriers, it could boost the economy by over 60 billion.
And we should
deregulation.
We should make clear to people, I'm looking at Carolyn here as well, make clear to people that if we try to stay in the customs union, we can't then do the kind of free trade deals that people might want in other parts of the world. It is quite a tough choice between you're in it or you're out of it. And if you're out of it, then there is a bit of a cliff edge. There's no way of getting around that. But you can do your trade deals around the rest of the world. That seems to be the narrowing choice at the moment.
I think those choices are coming down to that. And to be absolutely clear, I mean, businesses now are just full steam ahead in trying to get the best Brexit and do see opportunities in trade deals around the world. I was in China and India recently, and there are real opportunities there. But it is this question of how you get there in a way that doesn't create uncertainty around regulation and what actually happens at customs borders. And I think those are the issues that now need to be really confronted.
To talk it up, because when I do hear figures in authority sort of doing the whole Brexit, I sort of think that's going to be sort of self-prophesying doom and gloom.
Confidence is hugely important for the economy, always, and of course it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, if you actually talk the economy down, talk Britain down, as some business leaders are doing, of course, as well. It's very, very important that we actually look at the positives, and there'll be winners and losers within the business community. The economy as a whole will win. But the winners will be the ones who embrace a new future, a better future, rather than trying to hang on to a poorer version of what we had before.
Well, let's turn to a man who is certainly embracing the positive, Adrian Gill, AA Gill of the Sunday Times, with a double announcement today.
Yes,
he's a friend of yours, I think.
He is a friend of mine. I'm having lunch with him on Wednesday, assuming he doesn't cancel me. And I did say to him, I hope... A.A. Gill, for anyone who doesn't know, is the writer on the Sunday Times. He's the theatre critic, he's the TV critic, restaurant critic, and
former husband of the Home Secretary, and very interestingly, a dyslexic who's written about it. He
severely dyslexic,
and yet, when I presume he dictates, one of the best writers in the business.
Oh, but I personally think he's a genius, and I don't use that word very often. And I said to him, I do hope you're going to write about this, because I thought about his cancer, because I thought it will be the definitive article on having cancer. So he obviously is going to write about it, but he says here, you know, there is barely a morsel of offal, he's talking about himself, that is not included in his cancer. I have got a trucker's gut-buster, gimpy, malevolent, meaty malignancy. And this is what we're going to expect from Adrian. He's going to write beautifully about it. And he's quite sort of positive and upbeat. It was found on the spine and in the lung. But what I like most of all about it is he's determined to go with the NHS, because he says that there is a human connection in the NHS. And he said, my father always said, I don't want to die in the trenches. He said, I don't want to die in a trench in Harley Street.
Very good for him. All right, and we must turn now to the other huge story of the week, of course, which is Ed Balls, as it is every week. Again and again and again, he cavorts ridiculously and the country goes wild. What is going on, Karen?
Well, I have to say I loved this spread from the Telegraph because it's all the really, really serious stuff about Brexit. And in the middle, there's this amazing photograph of Ed Balls, who just danced his socks off last night. And there
Not
is
very well.
But that's the point of Strictly. It's the journey.
It's the dad dancing, yeah.
It is. And here is just brilliant light relief in the middle of some really serious news. And, you know, power to his elbow and his dancing shoes.
So, final story, John, on the theme of politicians' makeovers. You've got the Sun there.
I think Ed Balls dances as well as I do. My wife would attest to that. Yes, I mean, makeovers, it's interesting how, of course, people project images onto the famous and the politicians. I remember listening to a little interview with Margaret Thatcher in her early days. It was repeated just recently, where apparently she never wore a twin set, and yet twin set and pearls and a hat was how she was always represented. So it's very interesting how these politicians are actually making of, and why that's important to identify them and identify their characters. Boris, of course, has had his hair cut recently. I believe it's at Harvey Nichols, and he's looking very smart.
He still does that thing every time, doesn't he?
But they are, despite what everyone thinks, real people.
They are.
There's a final story.
Yes,
I said it was the last story, but there's a story about what's going on in Japanese
Japan has
dating.
a bit of a crisis. It had a marriage crisis anyway. It's now having a relationship crisis because, according to research by the Japanese government, there are about 30% of single women and 15% of single men who are now falling in love with memes or virtual characters in a game. And that's actually higher than the amount of people there that fall in love with, say, a pop star or whatever. And there are hotels that they can go to, a whole subculture, go with their meme console partner for a romantic break, etc., etc. So it's worrying. You know, when I see people in restaurants now, both on their phones, they're not talking to each other, they're talking to other people, and it's a worry. So is it you, Andrew, here, or are you a cyberbot? That's what I want to know.
So long as I'm attached to the mains electricity, I'm completely normal. Thank you all very much.
We're going to start with a look at the Sunday papers. Many of those stories, of course, set in these papers. I'm joined now by the Conservative MP for Gillingham, Rehman Chishti, the chair of Republicans Overseas, Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes, and the co-leader of the Green Party, Jonathan Bartley. Very good morning to you all. Let's dive straight in. And Rehman, take us to this story in the Telegraph about Aleppo, of course, the sense that the Russians and the Syrians have been pounding it with, I suppose, the Americans and others distracted for obvious reasons.
Well, look, what we're seeing now is the Russian aggression being completely unchecked. 120 lives have been lost yesterday, where the Russians have, used barrel bombs to target civilian areas. A hospital for children has been targeted, and all the international community can say is we'll impose sanctions. The Russians cannot do this. This is unacceptable. But guess what? The Russians are going to continue doing it. And what I see coming from the United States, we've heard a statement before from President-elect Trump to say Syria is an influence for Russia. Does that then mean the international community is going to walk away from Syria and allow the Russians to do what they want? And
ideally, what would you like to see being done?
Well,
would you like to see the international community take on the Russians?
Well, I would say we have missed an opportunity a long time ago due to the international community's indecisiveness. The United States could have taken earlier action. We could have looked at safe havens. We could have looked at no-fly zones.
That's we wouldn't start from here, but we are here. What now?
But where we are now is tougher sanctions against the Russians to say, look, you cannot carry on doing what you're doing. I know there are GCC countries out there which are prepared to put troops on the ground. They need their key allies. The United Kingdom, if the United States wants to leave it to Russia, then I would say the United Kingdom has a moral obligation, with our historic links to those countries, to charter our own course in foreign policy.
Do you think the United Kingdom has an obligation, a moral obligation, to introduce an arms embargo to any country involved in that situation, any country across the Middle East.
Do you think it'll make a difference?
It certainly will. When you pump weapons into a place, people get rid of their old weapons, they pass them on to rebel groups get hold of them, it fuels the conflict. Of course, you put more petrol on a fire, the fire goes up.
Well, the Russians and the Syrians don't get weapons from the UK.
They are certainly going to get weapons from other sources. When we're supplying weapons to those sources, those weapons get passed on. You know, the more weapons you put into a situation, the more weapons you flood the world with danger.
Jan, come in on this and tell. I mean, you know, I mean, critical of this is the attitude of President-elect Trump. He seems to admire President Putin and quite admire President Assad.
Well, that's what concerns me. First off, it's been blown out of proportion that he admires Putin. He said one nice thing, and then the media just carried it, you know, because anything negative about Trump, let's make it negative. But let's say that Trump really does align himself with Putin. What are the downfalls that you see to Aleppo if he ends up supporting Putin?
Well, what the downside I see is that the green signal has been given to the world that the aggressor can do whatever he wants. And therefore, over the last number of years, we've seen the Russians, you know, backing President Assad, have killed so many people. And therefore, what the United States at the moment is saying, the actions of the Russians backing Assad with the Iranian militias is completely unacceptable. Although they haven't done anything significantly to alter that, rather than having a Geneva 1 or a Geneva 2.
Well, I mean, we'll continue things like this because we've
substantively.
brought in Donald Trump, and I just want to come down the line here. Jan, your first story, you've chosen actually Tony Blair, but there is a dimension to this, isn't it? Because this is a story about him wanting to get back into UK politics, perhaps, but also he's been meeting with senior members of Donald Trump's team, hasn't he?
Well, he's tried to.
Oh, right. I thought he had lunch with one of them.
Well, yeah, he did.
With his son-in-law.
He did have lunch with the son-in-law, but I wouldn't take that as far as some other people might. I would give more credence to any Farage visits than I would Tony Blair.
Oh, right.
But the fact that he's trying to be a new Kissinger, was he ever a statesman that anyone would have gone to is really a question for me. And the MPs are saying that he's coming and setting up meetings and he's just sucking all the information out of them, and now he wants to combine. He had 3 consulting businesses that he's going to combine into one. He had 4 offices in London that he's going to combine into one, and in January make an announcement of a new consulting organization, Tony Blair Associates, TBA, to be determined, you know, really, it should be TBD.
Jonathan, could you see him? I mean, you know, he wants to apparently lead the anti-Brexit forces. Could he gather you all together and be at the...
I thought he was supposed to have sorted out peace in the Middle East. I thought that was his...
Back to the story we were discussing.
You know, I think people are looking for a figurehead, and I fear that, as in other places where there is a power vacuum emerging, people of influence will move in. I think Blair is yesterday's person. I can't see him making that impact. But what is clear is that people want a figurehead to lead people in this Brexit context that want to fight very, very hard against a hard Brexit, want to fight very, very hard to maintain environmental rights.
There's an interesting parallel, because the fact that they're calling him a remoaner, you know, that he brought this up about remaining, he is toxic to Article 50, just as Obama was toxic to Hillary Clinton, and it really spurred people on.
I think the Brexiteers should encourage him to get involved in it.
Well, exactly, and the fact that he is going against it also says that he has no respect for the voters and thinks he knows better, and is totally out of touch because it's the elite establishment that they're rejecting.
Back into that again. Well, let's talk about, well, I suppose they are establishment. Certainly Her Majesty here, Jonathan, the Queen, the head of state. And
Can't get much more establishment.
Indeed. I don't think we could deny that. And the head of state to be Donald Trump, and this idea that the Queen is kind of an ace for the UK and that it will impress President Trump.
It's really, the timing of the story, I think, is very interesting. You know, 2 days ago we had the announcement that the government's new push on infrastructure would include Buckingham Palace, 350 million quid going into revamp.
Do you think that's a waste, by the way?
I do. I disagree with John McDonnell, who's supporting it. I do think it's the wrong way to spend this money. But it's also interesting that, you know, we have a very difficult situation. Trump is a racist. Is the Queen going to entertain a racist at Windsor? It seems that is the plan. Now, if the Queen is going to do that, and let's be pragmatic, we have to engage with world leaders. We have to do deals with them. We have to, you know, it's about being constructive. she must put the issue of climate change on the agenda. This is the biggest issue that's facing us as a country. It's the biggest issue that's facing humanity. We must have that reassurance that if she is going to entertain him at Windsor, that is going to be at top of the agenda.
Well, I wonder, Redman, what do you think? I mean, do you think the Queen, Her Majesty, should meet? Jonathan's saying he's a racist. I mean, he is the elected head of state-to-be of the world's biggest democracy.
I think there's something different called when you're running for office and when you're in office in terms of the decisions you take.
So you're racist before and you're not a racist afterwards.
But what I would say, Jonathan, I agree with you. There was a lot what he said which I totally disagree with. You know, for example, saying, you know, he would ban, you know, all Muslims from entering the United States. Does that mean I would not be able to go to the United States? And I would say the words of the most powerful person in the world are important. And I tell you why I say that. His words, those words, created a perception of war between civilization and Islam, when at the moment there is a war between civilization and an evil death cult. And therefore, Daesh, you know, looked at those words and took them further by saying, hey, they don't want you anyway, come to us, applying to the disillusioned who get sucked into this poison ideology. His words, you know, which he said before, were completely unacceptable. Okay. But we have to deal with reality. He is now the president.
I want to add something very important, and I think now that he is president, people have to stop saying he banned all Muslims. What happened was Jay Johnson, the head of Homeland Security, and our national security advisor said that we could not vet. Now, he should have said the refugees, or he should have said anyone from Arab nations that sponsor terrorism, but he didn't.
So,
he said
okay, so you're going to say it's going to change. Listen, I just want to move it on because you've got a story connected to it. This, Mr. Trump obviously picking his substantial team, but the question who's going to be Secretary of State, a big issue here, and maybe Mitt Romney, defeated candidate in 2012.
You know what? I think that it could be a very good move, but I doubt it. I think it's a very important position. Number one, Trump values loyalty. Second, fairness. And Mitt Romney really went out against him. I am sure that he would bring Mitt Romney in as an advisor, but no. And, you know, also on this racist claim, and Jeff Sessions, who's been appointed Attorney General, and they're accusing him of racism. In fact, he desegregated the schools in Alabama. In fact, he took on the KKK. And I think we really need to wait a little bit before we perpetuate these.
What he said and what he does might be different things. Jonathan, I'm going to get to you, Raman, in a minute because you've got the autumn statement story, which we must touch. But Jonathan, you've got another Brexit-related story here in the Telegraph: hard Brexit v soft Brexit.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've got this dividing line becoming very, very clear. So in the Telegraph, you've got Tory heavyweights demand May backs a clean break with the EU, 60 MPs who are coming out and trying to push May. But in The Guardian, in the Observer, you have the CBI making a plea to May for a smooth Brexit to maintain access to the single market. Now, it's becoming increasingly clear that this is not an issue of right and left. This is an issue of, at the moment, a hard group and business on the other side. And this is a very difficult situation for these 60 MPs who, supposedly are supposed to be pro-business, now finding themselves very much at odds with the CBI. And this is going to get worse and worse and worse until the government comes forward with a very clear plan and lets us know what it is going for in negotiations.
Well, I've got the new head of the CBI coming on the programme a little bit later, so it'll be interesting to talk to him about that. So, Reman, the Express and many other papers carrying this, the pre-leak of the autumn statement about a substantial investment in infrastructure.
Well, let me make it very clear. I don't know what's going to be in the autumn statement. But what I can say
headed me off in the past.
having read what's in the papers, 1.3 billion, I think it's absolutely vital we get our roads working. If you look at the state of our roads in the United Kingdom and those around the world, we are around 20th. With in relation to our international competitors, and that is wrong because the amount of time that's wasted coming from one place to the other and how much it costs the economy is absolutely wrong. And I think the way forward by investing in our infrastructure is absolutely crucial to getting our economy moving.
It's about what infrastructure you're investing in. I mean, this is entirely the wrong way to go. We know when you build more roads, you just increase the congestion. We've got tens of thousands of people dying from air pollution. We've got these terrible investments in Hinckley, in Heathrow, in HS2, the 3 H's, which aren't going to make us jobs rich. They aren't going to create the great jobs that we need. And all this stuff, creates X amount for the economy.
Well, where would you
what
put
does
it?
that actually mean?
Where would you put it?
A renewables energy revolution.
A lot of windmills.
Not offshore wind has the potential to produce 6 or 7 times what we produce annually.
But Jonathan,
in
can
our
I just say one
electricity
thing? You
consumption
just
with really
mentioned
good
the
jobs.
CBI earlier, and Dermot, you've got the CBI coming in earlier. Next, Jonathan said we should listen to the CBI, and I think you should ask them this question in relation: do they think it's the right way forward to invest in our roads to get our country moving in forward with the economy? And I think it's the right way.
They would say
to
that.
the
They would
CBI.
say that. The question I've got for you, Reman, is we've all been around the block politically for a while. Will it ever happen? 2013, George Osborne said much the same thing. 2010, he set up the National Infrastructure Fund. They didn't do anything.
Look at the figures. Since 2010 to now, we've spent $9 billion already on infrastructure development in relation to our roads. We've committed to another 15 billion to the end of the decade. So we have done that. 3,000 infrastructure projects were completed under the previous administration led by Prime Minister Cameron.
And of course,
we've got 6,000 to go, worth 460 billion.
And of course, Jan, this is a big part of Donald Trump's appeal, isn't it? He's going to spend trillions, apparently.
$5 trillion, which was already in the budget because that's what Obama wanted to spend, and so they're calling it Obama 2 for the infrastructure savior.
And Trump might just be able to do it.
It is interesting that there is an international movement against austerity now, coming out with investment in infrastructure, but the choices are now crucial. Is what infrastructure we invest in.
Yeah.
George, we've got the important story of the time.
Sorry.
Ed Balls, Ed Balls.
I'm such a fan of Strictly. We sat round last night. It's great to see. It's great to see a Labour politician doing well at something. It really is. I love it. I think there's a great authenticity when you see politicians show their human side. And he came down out of the sky in the ballroom playing this pretend piano. He clearly does play the piano.
I would love to go on it. I would love to do Strictly.
Well, I would too.
Yeah, exactly.
Queuing up, no shortage there. Thank you very much indeed. No shortage of stories. We're out of time. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for taking us through some of the stories in the papers there. Let's take a look at some of the week's top stories. I'm joined now by my panel of political experts. Polly Toynbee from The Guardian, Ian Dunt, author of Brexit, What the Hell Happens Now? I hope you can tell us. And Fraser Nelson, editor of The Spectator. Very good to see you all. There's Ian. Fraser, I'm going to start with you, though. And, what the hell happens now? It starts with you. We've got the autumn statement. We've got the Chancellor there this morning on the morning show saying eye-watering amounts of debt, inflation is back. It doesn't look great, does it?
No, and strangely, he seems to think there's enough money for an infrastructure splurge. This is his message, which is given to the newspapers this morning. That was going to be £1 billion more for the roads. And it's a bit strange because you think, well, if the public finance figure is worsening so much, then where does all this money come from? How come George Osborne couldn't afford it? But significantly, what this means is he's going to take a sort of more Donald Trump-style approach to spending money whether or not he's got it. This is the sort of thing that, Labour should applaud because they believe in borrowing and spending. Effectively, he said, yeah, you're right. We're going to borrow, we're going to spend, and this George Osborne target for balancing the books, forget it. Yeah. It's going to be a lot.
But there's the extra hit as well, isn't there? We're apparently going to hear about an extra 100 billion over 5 years because of Brexit, aren't we, Polly?
Well, yes. He's got a huge hole in Treasury receipts. That much less money will be coming in. He'll have that much less to spend. Very worrying. What we'll see is who he really is, who Theresa May really is for the first time. We know nothing about them. We've had no policies to talk of up until now. He has huge cuts, tax cuts in there. Is he going to go ahead with them? I mean, spending $1 billion on roads is neither here nor there compared with, enormous tax cuts to the very rich, to the top taxpayers, in corporation tax, and in raising the tax threshold, which only really affects the top half of earners. So if he was really prudent, if he was really the wise man he looks as if he is, he'd say, you know what, this is no time for tax cuts.
Do you think he should, Ian? I mean, they're in the manifesto, of course, that change, of course, raising the threshold and helping the people who are paying the 40% tax rate, pushing that up to 50,000.
I mean, there's a lot of things in the manifesto that aren't going to get done, so I don't think that he's in any difficult position there. There's a bit of a push from sort of some Tories, I think about 40 of them now, for him to sort of actually start cancelling away the sort of cuts that were expected to working age sort of tax credits and to working age benefits. That's probably a rather smart way to go and would chime with the rest of what Theresa May said. But he's going to have to be just as cautious here as she has ultimately been so far, because there is no story for the next 5 years apart from Brexit. So no matter how many speeches she can make about people who are just about getting by, there's no capacity for government spending because we're driving towards what looks to be a cliff edge if we stay to the current timetable that Theresa May is operating to. That radically reduces the options that they have.
But how does she help? She's identified these, and it's this awful phrase, just about managing, and I'm not going to turn it into the jams. Well, there, I've said it now. But How does she direct Philip Hammond, or how does Philip Hammond
One easy thing she can do, costs $3 billion, but that's very easy to claw back from the other tax cuts he's planning to make, which are greatly more than that, is universal credit. And Ian Duncan-Smith has been begging and begging him not to make this crucial cut in the working element, which hits the people in work earning very little, who desperately need...
$3 billion. They're
get
a lot of support.
They're going to get a
I mean, Ian
huge
Duncan-Smith
cut.
walked out of cabinet allegedly for that reason.
Well, he did, and this is the great George Osborne sin against the government's agenda. I mean, so far, the Tory years have been incredibly progressive. If you look at what households have benefited the most, they're the ones at the bottom. The ones whose income has gone down the most, they're the ones at the top. So, but Theresa May is saying, well, the very bottom, yeah, sure, they've done pretty well over the last 5 years compared to other income groups. But what about those not just at the bottom? She's got it within her gift. Universal credit means that you can tweak this to help whatever income segment you want. Now, how much do the Tories want to help the strivers they keep talking about? George Osborne's tax credit disaster meant that for pretty much 5 years, people were going to be really no better off in those income groups. You could earn more, but the more you earn, the less welfare help you got.
Okay, so you're agreeing on doing that.
My guess is that he will do it,
Yeah.
because this is the ultimate test. If he doesn't do that, then let's never hear the word jams again.
And Ian, as we move, because the two join up, we move into the Brexit discussion. This 100 billion figure I mentioned over 5 years. Well, you've written the book. Is that the kind of right figure, the cost to the exchequer?
There's a lot of variables, right? But it looks, if we stick to the current timetable, like you'll be facing very, very severe economic consequences indeed. Nobody believes that you can do a trade deal in 2 years. Nobody thinks that, unless you do a very, very bad deal on tariffs. But who cares? We're a services economy, and that doesn't even deal with the bureaucracy that you would face if you face country of origin checks, for instance, by leaving a customs union. So that seems the ballpark, a sensible amount. We've already got a suggestion that we'll be looking at a 25 billion black hole by 2019, 2020, which is exactly, if Theresa May sticks to her...
This is on top of the original forecast for the deficit.
Right. Which, if Theresa May sticks to her current timetable, is exactly when we would leave the EU and suddenly face tariffs and suddenly face blockages on the border because we can't get our goods through, because we don't have the checkpoints and we have to do the tests, and suddenly face a migration from the city. So right now, 2019, 2020, looks like the crunch year, year zero, where we find out just how severe Brexit is going to be, and the signs don't look good.
Polly, awful lot more borrowing on the cards then. I mean, as Fraser was saying, but Labour can't really be opposed to that, can they?
A huge amount more borrowing, but I don't know what John McDonnell would do, but I know what I would do.
Well, he's got 500 billion, hasn't he, in the
But what you could do,
even more.
you know, the NHS, it may not get through this winter. The social care crisis is appalling. It would be quite easy not to make these tax cuts, which are worth many, many, many billions, and to put some of that into stopping these instant crises. And of course, infrastructure, very important too.
And what about this 60 Conservative MPs, Fraser, want to bring that up, saying, you know, on the issue of hard, soft Brexit, let's term it that for ease of conversation, that, you know, we don't need the customs union. We don't need the single market. What the public voted for was to leave and properly leave the European Union.
Yeah, and this is the debate that's going to dominate the next 2 or 3 years, because until Theresa May starts negotiations, nobody, not even she, knows what it's going to look like. And in a way, there's no real point for the MPs debating this, because it's not up to them. The House of Commons will be able to say yes or no to whatever deal she agrees, but then as to what deal it is, that's up to the 27 other member states.
And the Walloons.
But do you think there's an almighty battle brewing, or if it's not already taking place within the Conservative Party? I was just speaking to Andrew Lansley, Lord Lansley this morning, myself, saying, well, we've got to stay in the single market, but he thinks that something can be done about EU migration within that. These people are saying, no, let's get out.
I think there'll be a debate, but I don't think it will break the Tory party. I mean, fundamentally, people voted for Brexit. What sort of Brexit? A lot of people are quite relaxed about that. I certainly am. I back Brexit as long as it happens. Then I don't think you can call it a democratic outrage. So ultimately, the Tories have got opinions, of course they do, but it isn't the government's to mould. This is the negotiations and what the other countries are prepared to give us. So yes, you're going to get lobbying, but really, if the Tories keep it together, they can have power now for probably another 9 years. And I think they will take that rather than tear each other apart.
I think we're destined for a real split. I mean, it's been there back to from the year dot, this split within the Tory party, and it is now deeper and worse. You would think the whole point was the Brexit referendum was meant to resolve it, instead of which it's made it deeper, darker. Those 60 sitting on the back benches are very ominous. She's only got, after all, a very small majority.
Well, where's Labour in all this? Because there was that survey, wasn't there? I mean, it didn't take much doing. For the majority of Labour MPs, their constituencies voted for Brexit. They've got to be very careful the way they handle this discussion about Article 50 and indeed leaving altogether.
I think that's true. It's very difficult. It's lucky that they've got Keir Starmer, who's a proper grown-up, serious person who's
What, you mean Jeremy Corbyn isn't?
Making the argument for them. Well, Jeremy Corbyn's never been very keen on the EU anyway, so he's always been or John McDonnell. They've always been ambivalent. So you do need somebody who is the standard bearer. You know, Hilary Benn as well, for the European, for the 48%. Good heavens, if Labour could get 48%, they'd be in clover.
But, no, I mean, no one noticed this week, right? But John McDonnell came out and did a speech where he basically said, we support hard Brexit. Exactly. I mean, they've been hedging their bets throughout, because as you say, Corbyn and McDonnell, they believe in hard Brexit. They always have. They've been using this disingenuous whole access to the single market and all of this kind of code words for basically we're not supporting membership. This week he comes out and makes the speech. But I don't think that's the end of it. 'Cause if you look quite carefully and drill down into what Starmer's saying, Starmer does seem to still be envisaging some kind of Norway EEA kind of option. He does look like he wants to be a member.
Paying the money and having no say. I mean, that's how
no, I think it's more complicated than that, actually. I think if you look at what countries like Norway do, they go above the head of the EU to influence global regulation, which passes down. I think there's more power in that status than we typically understand or appreciate. But then there's also the third wing of the party. When you look at the Rachel Reeves and the Emma Reynolds and the Stephen Kinnocks, who are suddenly talking about immigration and we've got to do something about freedom of movement. I think those last two groups can be put together. There's a form of consistency there. But they can't be put together with a leadership, which evidently intends to support right-wing Tories.
Good man mentioning leadership there, and that book sounds like a read. Let's get a copy off you. Leadership. What about Tony Blair? We read on the front page of the Sunday Times today. I mean,
well, you don't want to believe everything you see on the front page of the Sunday Times. It has a sort of manufactured sniff to it. The idea that Tony Blair is going to come back, the great white knight galloping over the horizon, put together the new party that plainly we need from the split-off Tories and the split-off Labour and the remains of the Lib Dems. I mean, that might happen in some form, but the idea that it would be Tony Blair, you know, a retread. I'm a great admirer of his in many ways, but he is also toxic to too many people.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, I had an interview with him not so very long ago when I asked him to his face, I said, do you understand why your party hates you? And he looked rather pained. I don't think he gets it.
This is a drawback to him making a comeback. He needed party to come back through, and that party certainly isn't going to be the Labour Party. Maybe the Conservatives, I don't know. But I mean, him setting up an office in Westminster isn't quite the same as him saying, "Right, you lot are all useless. It's Tony time." In democracies, you need people to vote Tony back in, and I can't see who's really going to do that.
But,
so George Osborne's.
But I mean, is there another feature? You know, the Trump feature, the Brexit feature. Does it necessarily need the formal party structure now to form this kind?
Ultimately, there's going to be a party system. It must be clear to us all now that they are fossilised remnants of a political sort of culture which has gone. I mean, it's just not true that they're representing social classes which properly exist. And it's certainly not true that as politics starts to look more about open and closed than it does about left and right, that they really represent that kind of debate in any way, shape or form. The trouble is, systems keep individuals in place, and it's hard to sort of turn it all over. My suspicion is if that was going to happen to Labour, it would have happened this summer. The fact that it didn't means I think we're stuck with it for a time being.
Listen, thank you all very much indeed. Ian Dunt, Polly Toynbee, Fraser Nelson. Very good to see you, and get your thoughts on the great political issues of the week.
I've been getting away with it all